The world economy is currently facing many challenges, including Japan's earthquake recovery, Europe's ongoing debt crisis, and the continuing unrest in the Middle East. The current climate makes it difficult for policymakers and experts to look ahead and get a clear picture of how the rest of the year will unfold. All the recent upheaval has come when longer-term changes continue to unfold, such as China's growing role as the second largest economy, which is having a major global impact. To talk more in depth about the way ahead for the world economy, CNC has an exclusive interview with Professor Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. Professor Schwab, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, it seems uncertain whether the world has recovered from the global financial crisis 3 years ago. So what do you think of the current state of recovery, and how will the rest of the year unfold?
I think we have to recognize that the world is still in a very fragile situation, and we have a different situation for different countries. In principle, we have the traditional industrial countries struggling at this moment with relatively low growth rates and to a certain extent debt problems. We have, on the other hand, the much faster growing emerging countries, but also the emerging countries have their own challenges. For example, the threat of inflation, the threat of bubbles. So I would say we have a two-tier world. And you could add, of course, it's not only high inflation, low inflation, high growth, low growth, it's also high debt, low debt. So it's a very complicated situation. And we do not know yet what really the outcome will be, whether we will find back to sustained, strong and inclusive growth.
Well, speaking of the challenges, what do you think is the major priority for the world economy? Is it stimulating growth, or preventing inflation, or curbing high carbon emissions?
I think we cannot make a choice and prioritize only one aspect. What we need really is balancing out of our approach to economic growth. We have to put much more emphasis on the quality of the growth. It shouldn't be only quantitative growth, it should be qualitative growth. On the other hand, you have also problems which have been generated by the past. So you should invest into a much more green economy. You should invest into much more social services. On the other hand, we have to solve the challenges we are faced with, which means to reduce our debts and to fight inflation. So, in summary, it's a question of balancing out our economic policies.
Then what do you think the situation in the Middle East, what impact will it have on the world economy? Do you think the crisis in the Middle East will tip the world economy back into recession?
It's not only the situation in the Middle East. I think we also have to take into account what happened in Japan. And we have seen the latest figures in Japan with quite some reduction of GDP. Those are the risks which the world economy has to face. Coming back to the Middle East, I think what we have seen in Tunisia and Egypt is not isolated. We have seen the reactions of the population in Syria. We may see it in other countries. So the consequence will be a much higher volatility of energy prices and a big worry about energy security in the future.
Well, we know Japan's economy has shrank more than expected in the first quarter after the devastating earthquake and tsunami in March. Do you expect Japan's economy to recover quickly?
I was in Japan beginning of the week. I also had luncheon with the Japanese Prime Minister. I'm confident that the Japanese economy will recover. It's a strong economy. It's a economy which has companies based on unique technologies. On the other hand, the incident has shown how vulnerable the world is, because we are now so interwoven, particularly supply chain networks, and a small area which is hit by a disaster may have worldwide repercussions, because some tiny parts in the supply chain may be missing. So I feel the consequences will be twofold. First, the recovery process will give a boost to the Japanese economy, but I think it will also remind companies of the vulnerability in their supply chain approach. And it may lead that companies will become more cautious in spreading out the source management or the integration of parts too much worldwide.
Yeah, the world is fully integrated. And last year, the U.S. Treasury embarked on its quantitative easing policy to try to boost growth. So what sort of influence has it had on the world economy?
If we look at the US problems, I think the priority problem is to fight unemployment. We have now a situation in the United States where 1 out of 4 1 out of 4 men in the age of 20 to 50 has no work or has no guaranteed work or has become so desperate that he isn't looking anymore for work. So to create jobs is a priority objective for the United States. So the Q2 policy was to keep the economy alive, to generate economic activities and to create jobs. But there is a very interesting phenomenon today, which is called jobless growth. Contrary to earlier recoveries, when we saw an increase in GDP, led also to an increase in employment. This time what we are seeing is that the increase in GDP does not have a large impact on the employment situation. And the reason is that companies mainly boost productivity gains, which means they don't employ so much anymore people. So coming back to your question, I think this policy was necessary, but on the other hand, quantitative easing means that you increase the debt situation, and it means also that someone has to pay for those debts. And my big fear is that we are generating too much debt in the world and we leave the problem to the next generation. And what has happened in some way in North Africa, which you referred to, is showing us that the young generation, as the next generation, is not anymore ready to accept all the deficiencies which we have in the economic system. So I think we have to be very careful to solve our generation's problem, today's generation's problem, by just creating debts and leaving those debts to the next generation.
Okay, now we can touch something right now is happening. Well, the resignation of the IMF chief Dominic Strauss-Kahn, after that, the reports say the successor should come from developing nations. So what is your take on that? And how do you see the influence of the emerging economies?
I feel that for every international job, the best person should be chosen. I think the competition should be open. If someone from the emerging countries, and I know many people, would fit the criteria of bringing to the job the best qualities, he should be chosen, he or she. If it's someone from an industrialized countries who has better qualifications, he or she should be chosen. But I think there's one thing which is necessary. If the new head would be chosen from one of the two categories, the industrialized or the emerging countries, I think the deputy should come from the other zone. We need a kind of balance. So if the head is coming from, let's say, a European country, the deputy head should come from an emerging market country, and why not from China?
Okay, we can move to China. Well, China's economy has recorded one of the fastest steady growth rates in the world and stands as the second largest economy. What does it mean to the world as well as China?
It's astonishing and very impressive how China has developed over the last 30 years. I came here to China the first time in '79, just when the opening up and reform policy started. I have witnessed what has happened, and I'm deeply impressed and full of admiration. But becoming big and becoming powerful means also to assume additional responsibilities. We are living today in an interdependent world, in an interwoven world. What's happening in China is not without effect in the United States or in Africa. We are all together in the boat which is called world. We are characterized by interdependence, but also by togetherness. So in order to manage this interdependence, we need togetherness. And of course, when I speak about togetherness, the big players like US, China, have to take on more responsibilities, not only for their own destiny, but also for the destiny of the world as a whole. And I think today, to take care of global challenges is also in the best interest of, like for example, global warming. Global warming doesn't stop at the borders. So we all have to work together. And I think China is now challenged as a very big power, politically, economically, to contribute to manage our global affairs.
Well, in fact, some people, including some Chinese senior officials, say China's economy is imbalanced, uncoordinated, and unsustainable. So if they're right, how can China remedy those problems?
I know China has a specific challenge because China in some way is composed by two different economies. One which is very well advanced and developed, and maybe another part which is still very much underdeveloped. So you have two economies in one country. And certainly the Chinese policy will be, and I have seen the 12th five-year plan where it is very well represented. The objective has to be to make sure that there's much more a balanced situation inside the Chinese economy. And if I speak balanced situation, it has quite a number of dimensions. It's not only balancing out the more rich provinces and the more poor provinces, it's balancing out also consumption, investments, and export-led industries. It's balancing out certainly also economy and ecology, the environment. But doing all this does not mean that China has no responsibility on a global level. I think for every country has its problems. So Europe has its debt problems, the US has its unemployment problems, China has its problems, But despite all those internal problems, we have today a responsibility to work together to solve the global problems. And the global problems are environment, the global problems may be infectious diseases, the global problems is poverty, extreme poverty, and so on and so on.
Well, it's generally acknowledged that China's cheap labor and resource consumption has fueled China's quickly expanding exports, leading to economic growth. But that advantage seems to be diminishing. What do you think will be the future economic driving force?
I think China is going through a specific phase in its development. It started with low technology products which were mass produced and with low labor costs were very competitive on a global market, and China conquered the global markets, particularly with such products. But today, I think China has to upgrade its industrial position. This is necessary for several reasons. First, the labor costs become more expensive, and you have new competitors like Vietnam and other countries which now have the advantage of lower labor costs. But there's also another reason. China is producing every year 6 million graduates from universities. And those people are not anymore the people who are coming from the rural area looking for whatever the job is. Those people are coming to looking for much more qualified job. So the objective, as it is also described in the 12th five-year plan, the objective has to be to move up on the ladder of industry production and become much more a country which puts its future on the basis of high technologies. And this will have, of course, an impact on a global level, because the world sees now China mainly as a production place. But in my opinion, China in the future will become a formidable force in terms of technology, in terms of research. Today already, China is the second largest publisher of scientific reports in the world. So the world will have to adapt to China with a new competitive structure.
Well, there are other opinions. Economics professor Nouriel Roubini says there is a potentially destabilizing contradiction between China's short and medium-term economic performance. And he also predicts China is poised for a sharp slowdown after 2013. Do you agree with such views, and why?
I do not necessarily agree. I think he has one important point. As far as I know of his thinking, China has given a big boost to the economy, particularly through infrastructure projects. And the economy has very much profited from those projects to build new roads, new airports, and so on. Also the housing market. So his fear is once this special boost of the economy comes to an end, the economy could take great damage. We have seen in the United States with the subprime bubble, when the construction market suffers, the whole economy is suffering because it's a very important market. I'm confident that China in time will be able to rechannel the investments and the energy which is now put into physical infrastructure to develop much more its non-physical infrastructure, which means education, which means research, which means high technologies, which means also green economy. I think to switch from the hard infrastructure to the green infrastructure and to invest very much into green technologies, and China today is already the biggest investor in the world as far as green technologies are concerned, I think this could avoid the pitfalls which Professor Rubini is foreseeing.
Okay, see, you're very familiar with China's 12th Five-Year Plan, where China has set its target of 7% annual increase for the economy in the next 5 years, and which is lower than the country's 3-decade average. So how would you interpret the figure 7%?
First, we should still keep in mind that a growth rate of 7% is an enormous figure, because it means that you double the economy every 10 to 11 years. So it means even if a country grows only at 7% on an average, it means today we have 2011, it means that in 2022 the economic power of China will have doubled, which is very, very impressive. That's the first point. The second point is the more GDP you have per capita, the more difficult it is to grow. Just if you have $1,000 GDP per capita and you grow 10%, it means adding $100 per year to GDP per capita. If you have $10,000 GDP per capita, it means to add, with 10% growth, it means to add $1,000. So we should not look only at the 7%, we should look what it means in the totality of economic growth. So I think 7% is still a very impressive figure. It's far above a global average, and 7% will also allow China to avoid maybe certain dangers of creating bubbles in the economy.
To strike a balance between external and domestic demand, China has vowed to keep its exports stable and boost the domestic demand. What do you think are the main obstacles in expanding China's domestic demand?
I think there are two issues. The first one is the purchasing power. It means to boost the middle class. And I have seen again in the 12th Five-Year Plan that the target is to have faster growth of wages compared to GDP, which means you strengthen the purchasing power of people. And this certainly in the medium and long run will lead to a higher consumption expenditure. There is a second element, which I think is very important. China is developing its social security system, and I think the more people can rely on a social security system, the less they have the need to save for the future. At the moment, the high saving rate of China has also to do with the will of people to preserve their livelihood in the future. But if a social security system is functioning, is in place, I think we will see a switch from savings. Savings will still certainly be high. That's the Chinese mentality, but we will have more an orientation towards consumption.
Well, real estate seems to be the most important sector driving China's economy. But as higher prices are meeting significant public pressure, and the Chinese government has taken harsh measures to rein them in, do you think real estate is at a critical point, and should government take more regulation to cut the housing prices?
Real estate is very important. It's important for several reasons. I think real estate is what every person feels in its own budget, because you have to pay for a house or you have to pay for rent. So it's an important social factor. There are now two developments which are important. The first one is the risk of inflation. People want to move into tangible assets, which drives, of course, the real estate market. But I know that the government has taken quite serious measures. And in the real estate market, we have to know that it is important to keep in mind that measures do not have an immediate effect. Because from the decision you decide to build a house or a big building or whatever it is, until you execute, there is a kind of substantial period of time. So I think we have to see how it works out, because if you stop the real estate market in a too strong way, you may have a collapse not only of the real estate market, but of the whole economy. Because as you said, the real estate market is a very important part of the economy, particularly in China.
Well, last year in our interview you said the most pressing issue for sustainability is climate change. So how do you see China's approach, the approach China has taken towards tackling climate change?
When we look at climate change, I think we have to keep two approaches in mind. The first approach is a top-down approach, which means governments come together, like now at what is called COP17 in South Africa later this year, and decide about government policies to reduce CO2 emissions. But the other approach is a bottom-up approach, which means that business recognizes environmental technologies to be a great business opportunity, because they know in the future there will be an absolute necessity to make sure that we are much more efficient in the use of resources. Now, China has shown remarkable leadership in the bottom-up approach, which means China is, as I mentioned before, is now one of the top investors in green technologies. It's a leader in quite a number of those technologies. I just mentioned, for example, Suntech, one of the leading companies. So I feel what for me is impressive when I talk to my business friends in China is how much they have incorporated green technologies already into their own business behavior. And I think this is a very encouraging sign.
Well, the theme of this year's Summer Davos is Mastering Quality Growth. What message does the forum want to convey to the public?
It's exactly the message which we discussed during our interview, that in the future we should not look just at GDP growth, at creating more and more output. We should look at the quality of this output, and we should make sure that what we are doing is environmentally and socially sustainable. Which means environmentally, it means green technologies. Socially, it means that we create more inclusivity in the world. I'm in the world and inside nations. I think one of the aspects which we have seen in economic development, when you have free markets, which are good drivers of economic progress and social development, and you need free markets, but free markets have a tendency to create inequality and to create a strong differentiation between rich and poor. And we have to make sure with our economic policies that the divergence between rich and poor becomes not unsustainable. So what we want to show in Dalian is how with innovation, with science, with entrepreneurship, you create an economy which, from a qualitative point of view, is much more sustainable.
Well, we have the 5th Summer Davos in Dalian this September. So how do you value the past 4 Summer Davos? Where will the future of the Summer Davos go?
I think it has to be recognized that the Summer Davos, like the Winter Davos, is a very special event. It's not just a conference. It is a global event in China. I know there are many conferences in China. They deal mainly with the Chinese economy, but this is a global conference where people come together. Of course, they learn about China, but they look at issues particularly with a global perspective. So you have from all over the world, the best entrepreneurs, the new champions, as we call them, coming to Dalian, probably close to 2,000 people. So what we want to do in Dalian is to look specifically at those innovative factors which drive the economy. If we learn from the last 4, I think we have been very consistent. We started, Dalian becomes more and more success, or Tianjin, the Summer Davos, and today it has become a world-known event, and we are proud to have established this event, and our intention is to make sure that this Summer Davos stands for China as a host and as a country which reflects very much what we want to achieve, a responsible economy, responsible in terms of environmental and social sustainability.